welcome back to this episode of the Women in Money Cafe. Now, we are recording this on the 15th of February, which seems kind of timely because there's been some news this week about buy now, pay later. And we thought, who better to join us to discuss the pros and the cons, if there are any, of buy now, pay later than the marvellous Debt Camel, aka Sara Williams. So, welcome back into the cafe, Sarah.
Thanks for having me back, Julie.
All right, it's a pleasure. And with myself and Sarah today, we've got Jennifer. You with us, Jennifer?
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Now, I thought it would be really good to have Jennifer here as well for this conversation because there seems to be a lot of misinformation out there about how buy now, pay later impacts on your credit. And with Jennifer being a mortgage expert, I thought it'd be really good to get her insight and her take on it. So that's what we're going to do for the next 20, 30 minutes is just sort of delve into this world of buy now, pay later. What are the things that you maybe haven't considered about it, and what are the things you maybe want to watch out for it? So, Sarah, given that you are an expert on these matters, I thought it'd be really interesting just to open up with what your thoughts on it are.
I think I'm more nuanced than some debt advisors. A lot of debt advisors just go, it's evil, it's the slippery slope into way, way too much debt, and it's a good thing if most people avoid it completely. Well, in a way, it's always a good thing if you can avoid debt completely, but it is interest free. So if somebody is struggling and has to buy something, then there's a lot of reasons to prefer interest free than putting it on a credit card at 22, 30% or more interest. Or, horror of horrors, taking out a payday loan or something to pay for something. So it's not all bad. And if you can just use it occasionally and you pay it off and then you don't use it again for a few months, then perhaps you use it again to buy something, pay it off, no problem. Well, it's quite an easy way to buy something, and it suits you to spread it over 3 payments, say. There's nothing much wrong with that. But the problem comes when people buy more because it's so easy to buy. And therefore it doesn't feel like real money. And you think, well, I'll just, I don't know whether I prefer the pink or the mauve or which size it's going to be. So I'll get 2 or 3 different sizes in 2 or 3 different colorways and see what looks best. The theory is you try them all on and then you return them all apart from one. But what happens if you forget to post the parcel back? Don't get it back in time? Suddenly you're paying for a lot more items. Or when you try them on, you decide you love the pink and you love the green, so you're going to keep both of them, but you'd actually only intended to buy one in the first place. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you go into it with the best intentions. And that's now even harder, and we've got a cost of living crisis when people are just looking to get through to the next month and doing anything they can sometimes to get through to the next month. Get the new school shoes for the kids, feed the kids, put petrol in the car. There's a lot of pressure on people. This is another form of credit that it's easy, very, very easy to get into. But the repayments are high because you're not like a credit card. You're paying it back really, really slowly. You're paying it back, say, a third at a time over 3 payments.
In some ways, could you argue that that's actually a benefit of it in certain circumstances? Because when it's a credit card and you get the statement, it's got that horrible figure of the minimum repayment, which gets you nowhere really slowly. At least this, you've got a time frame that you're working to. And that there's accountability there that you must clear it by a certain time.
Yes, it avoids what I call the minimum payment trap on the credit card. And people just don't believe that if they just pay the minimum off and don't use the card again, it's going to take them 15 or 20 years to clear the balance. So you're avoiding that, which is good. And there's no interest being added, which is good. As I said, if you can afford it, you can pay it all back and you use it once a year or twice a year. It's nice. It's a neat little tool. Nothing much wrong with it. But where people buy quite a few things, perhaps from different buy now, pay later firms. So you don't just use Klarna, but you're using 2 or 3 of them at the same time. Then you get all these payments coming out, and it can be quite hard to remember what's coming out of your bank account at what time. That's if there's actually enough money in your bank account to pay them. And some people end up going overdrawn because of the payments that are being made. So then you're paying overdraft charges, which are high. And some people even use a credit card to pay off a buy now, pay later bill.
That's a really good point you've just made there, actually, because some of them it's weekly, isn't it? And some of them it's fortnightly you repay, and some of them it's monthly.
Yeah.
I personally would really struggle to keep up with all of that and
Yes.
remember what's going out when.
Yes, I mean, certainly, I mean, if you're paid weekly, then weekly payments sounds fine. Fortnightly doesn't really suit anybody in this country. In America, quite a few people are paid fortnightly, but there are some fortnightly buy now, pay. Well, 4 weeks, that's off cycle. If you're paid monthly and things, it often doesn't neatly fit with when you're getting paid. But the idea is you're just making these payments very quickly and they're gone. So it's a convenience, but it's not that much of a convenience because you have to have, quite a lot of money over the next 6 weeks, 2 months.
All right. So it sounds to me like you're quite balanced about this, Sarah. I didn't mean to sound surprised.
Do I rant? I don't rant no. about all sorts of debt. If I had an 18-year-old and the 18-year-old said to me, shall I put this on buy now, pay later or a credit card that my bank's given me, then if they can afford to pay off the buy now, pay later, I would rather they did that than put it onto a credit card and make their so easy minimum payments and start accruing the interest.
So I think, I was out talking on social media, trying to get other people's opinions on that. Oddly enough, the people that were talking to me were financial advisors, and they're all fine with using it, and they don't see anything wrong with that, which is fair enough because you would expect us to be reasonably good with money. But going back to what you were saying before, and me thinking, I won't remember all those payments. I wonder how many people actually then start to lose track of what they've got. So for instance, Jennifer, do you have people that sit down in front of you where they're coming to apply for a mortgage and they just completely forget that they've got these other debts?
Oh, absolutely. It's not even on their radar. Whenever we're going through and asking for what their credit commitments are, they'll always say, right, this is what I owe my car, this is what I've got on a credit card, or if they're using an overdraft, they'll normally say, I'm in my overdraft by this, and it gets cleared every month. But they'll always forget to say if they've got a student loan, and they'll very rarely remember if they've got anything on Klarna or any other sort of buy now, pay later.
Right. And does that have an impact when you're trying to get a mortgage?
It can. We'll always look at anything like that for affordability, but the bank does ask, or a fair few banks will ask, is there anything that's fallen due in the next 6 months that we need to be aware of? Is there anything else outstanding in your credit? Because they do see an awful lot of this. And if an underwriter's looking at it and you're right on the cusp for what's affordable, and they're seeing that every month you're having a few extra pounds going out to these buy now, pay laters, they can look to say, well, is this really within your means?
Now, I'm not a mortgage expert, okay, but the ways of mortgage underwriting is a mystery to me. But I'm going to pretend for a second that I'm a mortgage underwriter. Okay. And I know, it's a leap. But I'm looking at the information in front of me. And is it possible that I'm sitting there and I'm looking at someone that's using buy now, pay later, and the message I'm getting from that is that you can't manage your money on a monthly basis?
It probably depends on the scenario. It would probably depend on the scenario. If someone's using buy now, pay later, but they've still got a surplus of £500, £600, £700 at the end of every month, and it's just been a way in which to buy 8 dresses for a wedding that they're going to, then I can't imagine them having too much of an issue with that because it's still affordable. Whereas, see if it was that you're right in the cusp, but then you keep going in and out of your overdraft, and that's not always been taken into consideration, then they do need to scrutinise you because they want to make sure that whatever you do is affordable, because at the end of the day, they don't want to come and repossess you.
All right. So I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about how the buy now, pay later does interact with your credit report and your credit rating. So is that something that you can tell us a little bit more about, Sarah?
Yeah. So Buy now, pay later never used to be on your credit card report. Klarna did have some much long debt loans they would give people, which did have interest, and they would be on there. But the pay in 3 traditional buy now, pay later ones were never on the credit cards. So that changed about last summer, when Klarna started being added to them, and now other buy now, pay laters being added too. At the moment, it's just the transactions that are being added, and it's each individual transaction that's being added. So if you bought, it's not just like one payment to a credit card each month. It's going to show you every time you clicked on the symbol and used it to buy. But they're not being used to calculate the credit. And they're saying they're going to look at this for a year or 2 years and try to work out what to do. But the reason it's not simple to put them into the credit scoring is because when you take out any new form of credit, it hurts your credit score. That doesn't matter how sensible it is, great car finance deal, mortgage, whatever, it hurts your credit score for a few months at the start, probably 1, 2, 3 months. And after that, the sort of little green ticks you're getting from repaying that credit outweigh the harm for the new credit score. And so it goes back to neutral. And then as you carry on getting those monthly nice payments being recorded, your new credit is actually helping your credit score because it's showing you're managing that credit responsibly. That works fine for all the other forms of debt. But when you take a Klarna deal, which is repaid in less than 2 months, it will hurt. If they put it through the current scoring mechanism, it would hurt your credit score when it was added. And it's paid off in 2 months. You never get to the point where it goes back to neutral, let alone it helps your credit score. So every single buy now, pay later you did would damage your credit score, and that would never get rectified. Nobody thinks that's a sensible thing to do. But that's why they wanted them on there, because all the other lenders were saying, well, how do we know whether to give this person a loan? And we've no idea how much they're using buy now, pay later, if at all. So all the other lenders really wanted this on there, but they couldn't go through the current scoring. So they've got this strange system where they're listed at the moment, so other lenders can see it. And other lenders can see if you've missed a payment as well, but they aren't actually directly helping or hurting your credit score at the moment.
Okay, that's really interesting what you've just said, because when I hang out in personal finance groups, be it online, this is something I hear a lot, that people say they're using it to build their credit score. So based on what you just said, that's nonsense. It's not doing anything to your credit score. Is that right? That's
true. The only exception is for people who have a very, very thin credit record. An 18-year-old who literally doesn't have any credit at all. If they use a buy now, pay later, that will show on the credit record as a transaction that's gone through, and it proves they exist. They're the right name that matches up to that bank account, so it helps sort of check your identity and helps your file to actually start existing right at the start. But that's really pretty rare. For everybody else, it's not helping your credit score at all. It's not harming it, but it's not helping it. But lenders, when they look at it, they're not going to go, oh, shit, you've been quite good with this. Lenders are going to look for the bad stuff. Any other lender that's looking at your credit record, they're looking for some bad things. So if you missed a payment, it's definitely going to hurt you there.
Okay, so this brings us on to, there's a phrase you used before we started recording, Sarah, and let's talk about pretend adulting. So this idea that I'm using a buy now, pay later to go and buy a dress, shoes, whatever it is that I need. And I'm doing this because it's building my credit report. So that's me giving myself a pat on the back because I'm getting what I want, but I'm coating it, and look at me being sensible.
Yeah, look at you being sensible. You're not paying interest. You're not, getting your credit card balance up. You're it looks like a sensible adult thing to do, particularly, if you see something in a sale, you can get it now and spread the cost out a bit, no interest, it shows on your credit card, that must be good, mustn't it? So it can sound like a very sensible thing to do. And a lot of people can start off that way. The problem comes when you either have difficulty paying back that first thing, if you're really kind of on the edge anyway, and you perhaps spent a bit too much on the dress for the wedding, or because you could manage that one, but so easy you actually go and buy other things as well. So you're getting more and more to the point where a lot of your income is going out each month. That's leaving you a bit short for the things you really do need. And there you got into a problem there.
Yeah, so I think that's something I'd ask people to think about if you're using this is, are you doing pretend adulting with using buy now, pay later? Is this stuff that you actually need? And do you know how you're actually going to pay for it? So
yeah, I think the thing to say is, what is your income at the moment? Is it student grant, or is it money from a job, or how much income are you getting? What are your essential expenses? So, are you paying for rent? If you've got your mobile bills, the things you have to pay for, and how much extra money does that leave? So what's your budget? So it doesn't matter how much of a bargain that skirt is. If it's not within your budget, then it's probably not a good idea, even if it is interest-free.
Mm. Now, we keep using clothing analogy, don't we? We've had shoes, skirts, trainers, and all sorts. But there's so many places now that you can use it. I think I was reading even garden centres are offering it now. Really?
Oh, yes. That one. Wow.
My eyes did not.
So that essential pizza.
I don't actually use Deliveroo, so Just Eat, start taking Klarna. Then I might be interested. Right. So that is. So I wonder. It is becoming more prevalent, and the cynical part of me is over the last sort of 12, 18 months, they have all started to make some changes, haven't they? And it's as if they were trying to self-regulate themselves to avoid proper regulation coming in. Am I being really cynical there, Sarah?
Well, regulation's coming. Whether they like it or not, regulation is coming. So they have to get their ducks in a line so they can manage to cope with that. I mean, if you're Klarna, you're probably quite happy about this. I mean, in a way, you might prefer to be not regulated, but for Klarna, they might prefer, they're so big, they may well be the one that survives, and all their smaller rivals don't manage to survive in a more regulated environment.
Okay, so what would be the driver behind them not surviving in a regulated environment?
Well, the actual cost of regulation and the cost of making checks that you can actually afford to read this, because they don't have to make these affordability checks at the moment. Whereas if you go to an FCA authorized lender for a credit card or a loan, there are affordability checks in there. Some of them do them rather better than others do, but there is a basic duty in the FCA handbook to make affordability checks, which at the moment don't apply at all to buy now, pay later firms, because they don't have to be FCA authorized.
Right. So what are your thoughts on what you've been hearing so far, Jennifer, and on the whole idea of it?
I think it hugely depends on what people's rationale is for. If they're doing it, as a comfort blanket for things to allow them to get stuff that they don't necessarily need, then that's never going to end up in a good place if they're using it as a coping mechanism for their lifestyle. But if they're using it for things that they know they're going to return, or they are very comfortable with the payments, then that possibly is better than them putting it onto a credit card and that they never pay off, because no one really ever voluntarily goes to their credit card providers, well, please, can you take this off me in 3 payments? Whereas at least that way the debt is slightly more managed.
So
some of the credit cards are trying to offer the pay in 3 as well. It's just yet another confusing option.
Oh, I think I read about one of the banks doing this.
Yeah.
There's 2 banks doing it, isn't there? I think Monzo doing something like this.
I think so, possibly Barclays are.
Barclays are. I
Yeah,
think Monzo are in as well. And I think I heard that Apple are thinking about entering the market as well.
Yes, and then we got the interesting question about what happens if Amazon does.
Oh, I'm bankrupt.
Well, you see,
impulse control in Amazon is not good.
The way you look, the way the Treasury is trying to solve the problem about how to define what should be regulated and what shouldn't be regulated at the moment is it's saying if this is credit being offered by a store, just offering somebody, a way to pay for a television set or a sofa, or to spread the cost of their kitchen or their gym membership, football season ticket, to allow those to spread the cost over a period with no interest being added, then those shouldn't be regulated. But if the credit is coming from a third-party provider like Klarna, then they are in the lending game, essentially, and they should be regulated by the FCA as a lender, which sounds fine. But what about Amazon? Because Amazon, in theory, is a store, but it's very, very big. And I'm not sure what the government's really thought about how people could possibly get around some of these rules.
Yeah, and it's funny because we've mentioned regulation a few times now, and there is talk about that, and you're saying that they will eventually become regulated.
Yes.
And so you've touched upon the fact that they will then have to run affordability checks.
After some fashion. There may be a sort of small limit. They don't have to do it. If you're paying £14 for something at Primark, are they really going to go through a full affordability check on that? So there may be a sort of small limit they don't have to do it on, or they can just look at how much you've spent a month and then do a check after a certain level. This is completely undefined at the moment, but the basic approach is going to be that there has to be some form of affordability checking in there.
So I think then the other thing is, what else could regulation mean? So when I put out a post on Instagram asking people their experiences of using buy now, pay later, and there was a theme in the stories that came back. And this was to do with people. I think one example was someone had ordered something and the order got duplicated. And it took them about 3 months to get it rectified. So what started out as them spreading costs for themselves and making it more manageable ended up with them doubling costs and it taking a lot of time to get the money back. And I've heard a few stories like this where, and it's like, am I speaking to the buy now, pay later organization? Am I speaking to the company that I bought the stuff from? And it's this gray area. And presumably, if we bring in regulation, all that will kind of be governed by the financial ombudsman, would it?
You'll certainly have the right to take a complaint against the lender to the financial ombudsman, because it's the lender you're complaining against, they're not the store. Whether it's actually the store's fault, if it's the store's software you're using, I don't know. The buy now, pay later one should probably have picked up there was a duplicate transaction, but these happen anyway on your credit cards, and I think most people know somebody that's seen a duplicate transaction go through on a credit card, so it's not unknown.
All right, and so then the other aspect of bringing in regulation, I just wonder what your thoughts on this, of whether it's significant or whether it's something we should be paying more attention to or not, is obviously it's when we go to buy something, we've got a choice. How do we pay for it? And you're making the case quite rightly that it's an interest-free option. So rather than a credit card, which will have interest, but then obviously the credit card has extra protection with it as well. So, with this myriad of choices of how we pay for things, never mind whether we need it or not, it's trying to figure out which is the best option to use. So do you think the protection that comes with the credit card that you don't get with Klarna is something worth considering?
So this is the Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act protection, where if you're buying something which is over £100, you get that protection through a credit card. And you can therefore claim against the credit card company if your sofa never gets delivered, if it's faulty. And if there's something, if the retailer actually goes bust, there are situations where you can get your money back from the credit card company. And that's real, but I think people tend to think of it when they're mostly buying something more expensive rather than just something bit of casual stuff, putting on a buy now, pay later. There's also the question of cash back. So you can get credit cards which give you cash back at the moment, but equally if you go to some banks, so Chase at the moment has got an offer on where you can get 1% cash back on all your debit card spending. Would you be able to get cash back on buy now, pay later? There's the various apps that can help you stack up different forms of cash back and things. It's quite complicated to actually work out what the best way to buy something is. I think for many people it's not worth the angst of trying to sort of juggle a 0.5% cash back versus, you know, Section 75, which you're probably never ever going to claim on anyway, versus no interest on buy now, pay later. I'm a great believer that most people should just actually keep their finances as simple as possible and go to enormous lengths to get a tiny amount of cash back on one transaction, unless it's very big, of course.
Oh, you're singing my song. Simplicity when it comes to money. Absolutely. So, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a question. Don't worry, you get to ask me it back afterwards, okay?
Okay.
Have you ever used buy now, pay later?
No, I haven't. Have you ever used it?
No, I want to know why you've not used it.
It's not really came up. I think if I was going to buy something and I really wanted it, have I bought something online and used my credit card for it? Yeah, absolutely, because it's stored. And that probably for me would be why, because it's linked. So it's like, well, do you want to use your Barclays card or your Barclays bank account? It depends on what I'm buying, it depends on what I'm using. Whereas for, you know, Klarna or anything like that, it isn't set up for so for me, possibly laziness, and also that I don't need it. Like, see if I needed to do something where I was going to pay it in 3, I'd probably have to really assess, do I need it in the first place? So what about for you? Have you ever used it? And if not, why not?
I have not used it either. I think one is ignorance. So I'm going to go with this friction there. I can just use my cash in the bank, or I can go and have to try and understand this new thing. So I'll just use the cash in the bank. Thank you very much. Oh my God, I've got old, haven't I? That I'm not prepared to. Don't nod your head at me, Sarah. No, it is going back to what you were saying, Sarah, about simplicity.
Like, you know, if you've got the cash in the bank, it's just the simple way to pay for something. Or you know, it makes it easy to see what's happening in your budget. And you know, if you don't have to spread the payment across a couple of months because you can actually buy the whole thing at the moment, then there's nothing wrong with doing that, and it's simple. So I think you're probably just saying more about our own personal finances, that we don't have financial problems, which is why we haven't been looking around for whether buy now, pay later could actually help us or not.
No,
I don't think it can. I mean, if you can pay by cash in the bank, there's no advantage at all to using buy now, pay later.
No, I don't know if as well it's the psychological tricks that it plays on you. So if you're shopping for something and you see something that is more expensive than what you would normally pay for that item, then breaking it down into 3 smaller payments makes it feel, oh, well, I can attain that. Whereas maybe I just sort of shop within, my budget, and I don't look out with that. I don't know. So I guess I'm wondering how it will influence our spending habits going forward.
I think it would influence, but probably in a similar way to what it is that people can buy an expensive watch and pay it over 24 months on an interest-free loan that does show on your credit and does show up, because that now means that people can have that watch and it's only costing them £30 a month. So that to them is reasonable, whereas saying that they've got to fork out, £7,000 or £8,000 Most people aren't going to do that.
No, so essentially then we're saying it's a tool that people will either use really sensibly or people will get into trouble with, just like a credit card or an overdraft or any other of the multitude of finance options that we've got out there. So it's not good or bad, it's just a thing, and we can use the thing rightly or wrongly. So it is nuanced, this, isn't it? Because I can see the fact that, am I right as well in thinking that Klarna, there's no fees attached to it?
Yes. Yeah, no, it's.
So if I'm late paying it, there's no fee, is there?
I don't think Klarna do. I'd have to look that one up because they keep tinkering. All of the buy now, pay later firms, they keep tinkering with them. So I always go over, if somebody asks me a question, I go over and actually look at what is the case at the moment. I mean, certainly because with some of them, if you pay late, there are late fees. And if you're only buying something small, then the late fees can turn out to be a surprisingly large proportion of the actual thing that you've bought. But to me, those aren't the main problem. The main problem is the ease with which you can run up more debt than you intended to get into, and the way it can be quite confusing, particularly if you use several buy now, pay later, that you've got different transactions coming out at different times, that all this money is just vanishing from your bank account and is making it harder to budget. So next month, if you see something you want or need, or somewhere on the borderline between want and need, you're more likely to use buy now, pay later because you're not quite sure whether you can afford the full amount now. So it tends to be self-perpetuating. Okay,
so I think if one tip I would give to people then, if they are using this, is I've found, because everybody knows I love an app, and no surprise, all my banking's done through apps as well. But see, when it comes to money, I like a pen and a bit of paper as well. So I have a large book that has written down all my outgoings in it. So because if I go into a bank, they're all going out at different points, and I've got different bank accounts. So it's one place where I can see absolutely everything that I've got going out. So it'll list who the company is, how much I owe them each month, and what date it goes out in. And that's just something I can always refer back to quickly and easily and see where I'm up to that month. And so I would suggest then, if you've got multiple accounts with different providers on this, just get a pen and a bit of paper and write down each of the companies, how much the payment is and the date that it's going out and when it's going to finish. So ladies, have you got any other tips that we can help people that are trying to manage multiple accounts?
Well, the accounts themselves will show you not just when you're making the payments for this dress to Klarna, but also when you're making the payments for that handbag and that pair of shoes. So you can sort of see all your Klarna outgoings in one. It's just a question if you're using another buy now, pay later as well, that isn't showing up on a sort of single account for you to see. So the more you use, the more confusing it is going to get. If you're only using buy one thing, it's just 3 payments you've got to allow for coming out.
All right, so your tip would be just use one of them. Just use one company.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no reason to use more than one unless one of them starts turning you down, in which case you should probably be thinking, that's a bit of a warning. If Klarna won't actually let me to borrow any, perhaps I'm actually buying too much through this.
I've heard anecdotally people talking about Klarna that over the last 12 months, they have been getting refused, whereas they have been getting accepted in the past. Now they are getting declined and they are going elsewhere. Are they softly introducing affordability tests?
Well, they've got some checks.
Right.
I don't know what they're checking on. I don't know how far that would qualify for what the FCA thinks they should do.
Right. So
certainly if you've missed a payment or something, I think you're more likely to have, future transactions declined, obviously.
Okay, so as we start to kind of wrap this up, what do you think are the most important things that people need to be aware of when it comes to buy now, pay later? Sarah?
Be very careful that this is debt. It's real debt, even though it's 0% interest and it's so easy to just select at the checkout, and that if you can't repay this from money in your bank account, you're either going to get an overdraft or you're going to have to use a credit card, which turns into expensive debt. And don't buy too much. Just be very sure that you can manage those payments and set limits, set mental limits on how much you're prepared to buy, how much you want to spend on clothes, or we always say clothes, but it's things for your home, toiletries, or whatever you're actually buying.
Okay, thank you. And Jennifer, so in the context of the mortgage world, what's the one thing you would want people to take away from this episode?
Probably just to remember that they have it, because if they don't see it mentally as the same thing as a credit card or as a loan, and they're using it so regularly, they probably should start seeing it as that, in the same kind of context as what they do see any other finance agreement, because you do want to make sure that you're not giving cause for concern for any underwriting. So if they think you're on the cusp for something and they're really looking at stuff, they're not saying that buy now, pay later is absolutely going to be taken into consideration for everything they do affordability wise, but they do want to make sure that you're safe in the home that you're buying. So if you are pushing it and that's seen as a habit, then they do take all of that into account.
All right, that's fantastic. And I think then just go back to something you said, Sarah, a minute ago, it made me think of something I was talking with somebody about the other day. And that is about affordability and what you're spending your money on each month or each week. So you can always go back and listen to our episode, Let's Stop Pretending There's a Holy Grail. Go back and listen to that episode and just our take on the different approaches to budgeting. Because if you're using this, it's just being intentional about how you're spending your money each month. And if you're not being intentional about it, it's because you haven't found a budgeting method that suits you yet. So we did like a pick and mix version of all the different budgeting strategies. So just go and have a little lesson and pick out maybe one or two things from it and start implementing them today. And then just build on that to make you feel a bit more in control about what you're doing with your money. All right. Well, I just want to say, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Such an interesting topic.
All right. And Jennifer, as always, thanks for keeping me company.
No problem. Love being here.
All right. And until next time, take care, everybody, and thanks for listening.